Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're unpacking the chilling elevator footage and the bizarre disappearance of Elisa Lam to uncover what really happened. You know, this is a case that absolutely gripped the internet back in 2013. It spawned endless theories, ghost stories, and literally thousands of amateur investigations. But behind all that digital noise and those sensational headlines, there's a very real, very human story. So today, we're going to systematically break down the facts, the myths, and the ultimate tragic reality, just using the evidence at hand.
I mean, we've pretty much all seen it, right? That viral, deeply unsettling footage of the 21-year-old Canadian tourist. She's pressing all these buttons, acting super erratically, and then she just vanishes without a trace. In that 2.5 minutes of surveillance video released by the LAPD, Elisa's completely alone in the Cecil Hotel elevator. She peers out into the hallway, steps out, steps back in, and does these highly unusual, kind of erratic hand gestures. Honestly, it looks like she's hiding from someone, or something. And man, this single piece of footage was the spark that ignited a whole global obsession.
But here's the crazy part. For 3 full weeks after that video was recorded, police and the public had absolutely nothing to go on. Zero. But then, a pretty grim clue finally broke the case. Guests at the hotel started complaining about low water pressure. And even worse, and this is genuinely horrifying, several guests reported that when they turned on the taps to shower or brush their teeth, the water was running black. And it had this awful, foul taste. Obviously, this horrific detail led a maintenance worker straight up to the roof to check things out. And that's where the worker tragically discovered her body, inside one of the hotel's massive 1,000-gallon rooftop water cisterns. That discovery completely kicked off a massive internet frenzy. Just to recover her, firefighters literally had to drain the entire tank and cut a hole in the side, just because the maintenance hatch was way too small. So finding her didn't answer any questions. It actually multiplied them. Like, how on earth did a young woman end up inside a massive, sealed water tank on the very top of a downtown Los Angeles hotel? Well, to understand why the internet immediately jumped to a sinister plot, we really have to look at the dark context of downtown LA's notorious Cecil Hotel. As local historian Kim Cooper famously noted, the Cecil was where serial killers let their hair down. You see, this wasn't just any budget accommodation. By 2013, it had spent nearly a century building a really dark reputation as an absolute magnet for tragedy, violence, and notorious criminals. So naturally, when people found out where Elisa was staying, the internet's collective imagination just ran totally wild. And looking at its dark history, you can see why. It paints a picture of a lawless place serving as a haven for infamous killers. It opened as a luxury destination back in 1924, but the Great Depression quickly turned the Cecil into a hotspot for despair. Locals even gave it the super dark nickname, the Suicide. Fast forward to the 1980s, and the infamous Night Stalker himself, Richard Ramirez, called the Cecil home. He stayed on the 14th floor for just $14 a night while carrying out his horrific crimes. It's a morbid history that practically begs for conspiracy theories. So, with all this morbid history fueling massive online speculation, the public was staring at a seemingly impossible physical puzzle. How did she actually get on the roof? The LAPD had already searched the hotel extensively. They even took scent tracking dogs up to the roof shortly after she was reported missing, but they found absolutely nothing. So how did she get all the way up there completely undetected? This is exactly what internet sleuths fixated on. They looked at these massive physical hurdles and totally refused to believe a young woman could bypass alarms and climb into a 10-foot tank all by herself. Think about it. To access the roof, you generally need a staff passcode. If you tried to force the doors, it would trigger a blaring alarm. Now, sure, you could use a fire escape, but even once you're on the roof, these tanks were massive cylinders hoisted up on concrete blocks with really heavy lids. The sheer logistics of the whole thing convinced thousands of online detectives that someone else, someone who actually knew the hotel inside and out, just had to be involved. People were looking for answers absolutely anywhere they could. Conspiracy theorists even matched her elevator button mashing to a Korean urban legend called the elevator game, which is allegedly used to access an alternate dimension. The rules of this internet legend dictate a very specific sequence of button presses, which proponents claimed perfectly mapped onto Elisa's seemingly random actions in that surveillance footage. According to the myth, if you play the game wrong, or if you look at the mysterious woman who enters on the 5th floor, terrible things happen. I know, it sounds totally absurd, but that eerie visual match gripped the public's attention. And it gets even weirder.
Online detectives also pointed out some eerie, nearly identical similarities with the 2005 horror film Dark Water. In that movie, a body in a rooftop tank actually causes black tap water. Seriously, the plot involves a dysfunctional elevator and discolored water gushing from faucets, which eventually leads characters up to the roof where they find a missing girl's body in a water cistern. The parallels were so striking that many online began seriously wondering if Elisa's death was some kind of twisted copycat murder or even some sort of dark, supernatural synchronicity. But we need to move past the speculation and look at the tragic truth behind the mystery. Because as the real investigation unfolded, those sensationalized ghost stories gave way to a deeply human and really heartbreaking medical reality. Look, it's incredibly easy to get swept up in movie plots and supernatural games, but forensics and medical science usually point to much more grounded explanations. Ultimately, the Los Angeles coroner's office officially ruled her death an accidental drowning. They found absolutely no evidence of physical trauma, sexual assaults, or foul play. None. When the autopsy report finally dropped in June of 2013, it pretty much dispelled the darkest theories out there. There were no signs of a struggle whatsoever. But what the report did highlight was a critical detail that changed the entire context of that bizarre elevator video. Toxicology reports revealed that she was severely under-medicating her prescription drugs, and experts believe this triggered a tragic psychotic episode. Elisa actually had a known history of bipolar disorder and depression. The blood analysis showed that the concentration of her prescribed medications was incredibly low, which tells us she had stopped taking them as directed. And for someone with severe bipolar disorder, doing that can lead to really intense hallucinations, extreme paranoia, and basically a complete break from reality. When we start retracing Elisa's final days in Los Angeles, we can really see a pattern. Hotel staff even noted some odd behavior that forced her to be moved to a private room shortly before she disappeared. Originally, she was staying in a shared hostel-style room, but her roommates complained that she was leaving them strange notes telling them to go away, and she kept locking them out. Earlier, she was even escorted out of a live television taping in Burbank just for being disruptive. So the signs of an escalating mental health crisis were definitely all there.
Now, to truly understand Elisa as a human being, we really need to look past that viral video and look at her own words on her Tumblr blog. She went by the name Nouvelle Nouveau, and she openly documented her emotional struggles online. She wrote really candidly about feeling utterly directionless. Just weeks before her death, she posted that having depression seemed to mean losing the ability to even help someone else in trouble. It's just a raw, completely unedited look at the immense pain she was carrying during her solo trip to California. In another post from early January, she simply wrote, "It's sunk in how lonely I am. I just want a friend." These deeply personal admissions are so incredibly sad, and they really ground that sensational internet myth back into the reality of a young woman who was fighting a severe mental illness, all alone in a strange city. She wasn't running from an alternate dimension or a serial killer in that elevator. It was very likely her own terrifying hallucinations. In a state of extreme paranoia, climbing up a fire escape to a rooftop might have actually seemed like the only safe place to hide. And that ultimately led to a tragic accident in the dark. So when we contrast the internet's wild supernatural theories with the grounded medical facts of accidental drowning and under-medicated bipolar disorder, we learn a really crucial lesson about the real-world dangers of online sleuthing. On one side, you have an audience treating a real person's tragic death like some interactive true crime puzzle, and on the other, you have the quiet, devastating reality of untreated mental illness. Just as a final note on the legal side, a lawsuit filed by her parents against the hotel was ultimately dismissed. The judge correctly pointed out that the hotel could not have reasonably foreseen such a specific and tragic outcome. And all of this leaves us with a final, really provocative question to take away. Why are we so quick to prefer a sinister myth over a tragic reality? Why does society project ghost stories onto a tragedy instead of just confronting the quiet, very real suffering of mental illness? Perhaps it's because a ghost story is a puzzle we can actually solve, while the reality of a young woman losing her battle with bipolar disorder alone in a hotel is just a tragedy we have to accept. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really encourage you to always look beyond the headlines and seek the truth hidden within the facts.